So thanks everyone for joining. You're here for the F-1 J-1 Student Duration of Status Policy Change webinar. I'm Erin Skelly. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Services at Berkeley International Office. I'm also joined by members of our student advising team, as well as our director, Ivor Emanuel. So we're going to get started. We have a lot of information to cover. And I just wanted to say, actually, before we get started, I wanted to thank all of you for joining and thank you for your partnership right now. I know that we're all going through challenging times in terms of policy and regulatory changes just across the institution. I know we're not the only ones impacted as the International Student Office or our students, but in particular, our students are facing a lot of changes. So we really appreciate you taking the time to get educated on this and to consider how we'll need to support our international students moving forward. So thanks so much for your support and your continued partnership. I know that many of you may have questions that we don't address in the webinar, so I do want you to kind of have those take homes, and we'll be working on our outreach, particularly to partners that we work with frequently or higher level stakeholders, as we may need to adjust processes. You'll see as we go into the webinar, a lot of things are shifting. So just to get started, we want to make sure that the right folks are actually in the room. We've been running a lot of different webinars this week. And I want to make sure that you're in the right place. So this is the webinar for you. If you are faculty staff who work with UC Berkeley, F1 and J1 enrolled degree seeking or UC EAP exchange students. This is not for folks who are faculty staff who work with J1 research scholars, postdocs, things like that. So if you're that type of admin, actually, we're not addressing those issues because that's a different population. And we had a prior webinar for that group with a different part of the office. Occasionally, you might see that some of our graduated Berkeley students are on a J1 student, and maybe they're working for you as a postdoc. That's a bit different. But if you're not somebody who works with degree-seeking students or UC EAP exchange students, meaning enrolled students who are studying here, then this likely isn't the right webinar for you. And this webinar is not intended for our students. It's for faculty staff. A lot of the content is similar, but at the end, we're going to have pre-submitted questions, and we're going to be addressing questions that were submitted by faculty and staff, not student questions. So if you're a student joining, we did a different webinar for you, and it will be far more useful. So to set the stage, this is just the beginning. This webinar is just an overview. We don't expect everyone to understand everything right away. I would recommend reviewing the recording again later. There are substantial changes to F1 and J1 regulations, and we are still in the process of analyzing and reviewing that. It's very robust. And we may not have all of the answers right now, including to some of the pre-submitted questions. We're continuing to analyze the information as guidance comes out. There's not lots of guidance right now, and we'll continue to get that as time goes on. We're going to be continuing to provide updates to the campus community, including our students, including faculty staff, and that will include webinar series breaking down these complex topics and processes. And in terms of faculty staff, it also means that our presence will be showing up in other spaces. For example, I'll be at the GSAO meeting in a few weeks, and will likely show up in other spaces as we work on focusing on processes or advising changes that the campus needs to be aware of. And we do have a web page, and we're going to build that out. We're going to continue to build out our DS Rule web page with resources and informational materials on that web page, including recordings of our webinars, videos, and as we create FAQs. This webinar will be recorded and it will be posted and available on the webpage. So if you miss it or you have to drop out, we added an additional 30 minutes to include as much of the Q&A as possible. You can go back and watch later, and we'll make sure that you know where to access, but it will be on our DS webpage. And you'll get a copy of the slides. You'll be able to access them as well to click any links. So here's an overview. First, we're just going to do some basics on helping folks understand what this rule is. And we're also going to define a few immigration terms that are going to be helpful for you to understand as we talk through it. Next, we're going to go through key points of the rule. The rule impacts a number of different areas, and we're going to just do a little short dive into each of those areas, because this rule is expansive and impacts a lot of key points. Then we'll get into what your students can do and what you can do right now, kind of things to think about. And we'll get into pre-submitted Q&A. So thanks to those of you who submitted questions and answers. Hopefully I'll get through as many of those as possible. And finally, our resources. So the slides will also include links to resources, either from our office or from professional organizations or the government. So the understanding the rule. An introduction. So what happened is on July 17th, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services published what's called a final rule. And this final rule has an effective date in the future, September 15th, 2026. And a breakdown of the rule is that it has two primary impacts. So two big buckets of change. One is that it eliminates what's called duration of status, and it reduces the F-1 grace period following the end of program. It also has a secondary piece where it includes academic restrictions, and that is restrictions on changes in major, level, and school transfer. Each of these pieces has a number of additional things to unpack. So before we get started, I wanted to clarify a couple different terms. This is the work that we do all day, and I want to make sure that as I'm going through, you're understanding what I'm talking about, and I wanted to make some points of clarity. So we often hear the word visa thrown around in very loose language. I'm sure all of you have language that is specific to your programs. Visa is specific to us. The picture you see with Oski Bear's face, that's a visa. The visa, that document, the stamp that goes in a student's passport, it doesn't determine their period of stay, and it never did. It's just an entry document to cross the border. So be mindful that when you hear the word visa, it may not mean what you think it means. We may talk about visa status, but the visa itself, it really doesn't determine anything. It determines if a student has the documents they need to enter the US. Students have other documents that are of primary importance when they're in the US, and F-1s, that's called an I-20, and J-1s, that's called a DS 2019. You can see those on the left. And those contain important information. They're actually issued and created by our office. And they include academic information. They include the program's start and end date. They include the major, the level, work authorizations. So information about the length of program is contained here. The visa could be issued for different timelines. It's only an entry document. You'll also hear me use the term admit until date. We're going to talk about that in a moment. That is a student's period of allowable stay. So I think two things you need to immediately break apart here is that the I-20 or DS 2019 has an end date and it has a start date. That reflects the length of a student's program of stay, their degree program. Admit until date, that is the period of allowable stay within the US, how long you're allowed to be physically present. So this terminology is kind of key to understanding what comes next. So you'll hear this phrase, we're calling this right? This whole rule, elimination of duration of status. So you need a little bit of history before we get into what's actually happening. Currently, right now, and for at least 20 plus years in the past, Fs and Js, people in F1 or J1 student visa categories are admitted, receive an admit until date on their arrival documentation, and it indicates they're admitted, what classification they're entering as an F, they're entering as a J, and they're admitted until what's called duration of status. They don't get an end date. They get this like flexible phrase, and that phrase, that flexible DS annotation, allowed a lot of things. It allowed flexibility to complete their degree and any practical training to transfer. And essentially, it allowed them to extend their program of study or transfer solely through the international offices. We had the ability to extend the I-20 end date to transfer their documents to another school. And after graduation, we had the ability to recommend them for employment, and they had to apply to immigration for practical training to ask for employment permission. But if they were granted that, it automatically extended their period of stay. That duration of status just gave us great flexibility. The grace period is the time after the end of the I-20 or DS 2019. So that document has an end date, and then F1s get 60 days. Currently, J1s get 30 days, or at the end of their post-completion training. So for those of you who are familiar with F1 OPT is what they do after graduation. So they'd finish that and get 60 days. And that 60 days was used for Fs. They could apply for transfer, apply for their OPT if they had just finished graduating, or J1s, they could leave the country. It's also the departure window. So if they finished everything, they have that much time to depart. So what's changing? Everybody's getting a fixed end date. So after the 15th, there will no longer be this level of flexibility. So the fixed end date means that Fs and Js have to take additional actions to extend their period of stay. And if they overstay, if they stay beyond that fixed end date, it's really, really serious. They immediately begin accruing days of what's called unlawful presence, and that has really serious legal consequences. Additionally, the grace period for F1s is going to be changed to match the J1s. So they're only going to get a 30-day grace period. So those are kind of the major changes and what this means for their admission period. When we talk about admission, we don't mean admission to the university. We don't mean academic admission. We mean being allowed into the country, that they're being allowed into the country with a set end date. And if they want to change that set end date, they have to take more complex actions. That's what we want you to understand. So getting into the key points. It's not right now. We have time to plan. We have time to shift. We have time to educate. And there are certain provisions that give a little tiny bit of flexibility. So the rule becomes effective September 15th, 2026. Through September 14th, that current rule, what we're under right now, remains in effect. So right now we can extend people normally. Students can apply for OPT normally. F1s who enter before the effective date may qualify for certain transition provisions. The transition provisions are limited, so I don't want anyone getting super excited about it. We'll talk about it later, but the transition is pretty limited. There aren't a ton of benefits to being transitional, but there are some that are very, very significant. Fs who enter on or after the effective date will be admitted for a fixed end date, and they will not be eligible for a transition provision. So that's important to be aware of, and we'll get into who that's really important for a bit later. F1 academic restrictions, that becomes effective on the effective date. It doesn't matter if you're in transition. So the academic restrictions are highly impactful, and it doesn't matter if a student entered on September 14th, August 1st, or after the effective date. So I do want to be clear about that. So many things apply no matter when they enter, but there's a few slim areas that the transition provision has some benefits for students. Most of our students for fall, well, they should be here by the effective date. So I think that's a good thing. We're luckier than a lot of other schools that have quarter systems where they're going to have students kind of entering. Some of them get transitioned, some of them don't. But for us, the majority of our students will be able to qualify. So what does this mean? Fixed end date and duration of authorized stay. So these Fs and Js will now get a fixed end date. That's called the admit until date, which I'm going to refer to as AUD, admit until date. That AUD is either going to be, so that means when they go to the border, they are given a period of stay for this long. It will be the I-20 or DS 2019 program end date, which that just reflects the normal length of the degree, plus 30 days. Or if that period of time is longer, that end date is longer than 4 years, what they will get is 4 years plus 30 days, whichever is shorter. So at the time that they enter at the border, that's the time that they're going to get. The I-20 or program end date, and this is key. I think this is one of the biggest questions, and I would say panics that I'm getting from departments and our faculty and staff is, well, yes, we can issue documents for longer. We can give them an I-20 for the full length of their program. So 6-year PhD program, they can have a 6-year I-20. But for those students, what will be required is if they want to stay in the US beyond the admit date that they're given, so if they're only given 4 years and 30 days of entry, they're going to have to take an action to extend their period of stay. And there's a few different ways they can do that, which we'll get into. But for right now, I just want that to sink in that the fact that they're given a shorter admission does not mean they can't complete a degree. And it doesn't mean that they can't be given or admitted to academically a degree that's longer than the period of admission, the period of entry to the US that's allowed. So those students who are already here on September 15th, they're going to be transitioned to a new set end date. So they don't get out of that. They still get a set end date, but for them, it will be based on the same provisions. It'll be their current program end date plus 30 days plus their current grace period, or it'll be 4 years plus their current grace period. So what that means is the F1s, the Js, it doesn't matter to them. They only have a 30-day grace period. But the F1s, they'll automatically transition on that date to the end of their I-20 or the or 4 years, whichever is shorter, plus 60 days. That will be their length of stay, their admit until date. If one of those folks that's here on the 15th leaves the United States and returns on or after the 15th, when they enter and they go through the border, they would then get the date based on the new rule. So the next time they enter, they'd get a date that's until the end of their document plus 30 days. So basically, they no longer get that extended grace period because they're not transitioning anymore. They left and they came back. So extension of stay. So the first point is they're given a fixed end date. What does a student do if they need more time? And what might they need more time for? Well, that might be they are not finished with their degree, or that could be that their degree was longer than their period of admission. They've got a 6-year degree, they only had 4 years on their admission. They need to transfer schools, they want to keep studying. They changed their level and they need more time. Or it includes post-completion training. They want to get their J-1 academic training. They want to get their F-1 OPT. All of those things are going to require what's called an extension of stay. And there are two ways they can extend their stay. One is by applying to immigration using specific forms and processes in the US. The other way is that a student could leave and then re-enter using an I-20 or DS 2019 that has an extended end date. And when they cross that border again and present their documents at the border, they will be given a new admit until date. That is later. And so we'll kind of talk through what that looks like and give you some examples. But basically, the short answer is if they want to stay beyond that date that they're allowed into the country for, they have to extend. An extension can take two different tracks how that happens. If they don't extend on time, it will have serious consequences. So I think this is what I want to sink in is I think all of you know we send students lots of reminders. We bug them all the time. You're expiring. This is happening. That is happening. You're not enrolled. It is a time where we really need partnership and assisting students to do things in a timely manner. And I know it's hard depending on their age, their program, but it's a time where I think one of your big messages to your students is listen to bio, check their emails, because we're going to have alerts. We're going to be bothering them with lots of things, but they will have more work to do than they do now to make these extensions. Right now, they're very easy and they'll be more complex. So that's one thing to think about as a faculty or staff member. So what does this look like? So track one, student wants to stay in the US and apply to immigration to extend that end date. This is a two-step process. Basically, they would have to have an I-20 from us with a later end date. So if they were given a 6-year program, but their end date, their admit until date was only 4 years, well, they already have an I-20 that's later. Okay. But somebody who maybe finds out this year, well, I need another year in my program. Actually, I need more time to finish my thesis. Well, that student has to ask us for a new I-20. They have to get an extension. We need documents for that. So they have to do that. And they have to file with immigration, an application with immigration. And they have to file on time. Timely filing means their extension of stay is received by immigration before the end of their current date of admission, a current admit until date. And remember, that's the end of that previous document plus, 30 days or 60 days, dependent. So they have to file. That is their final deadline. However, there's a major point that we'll talk about shortly. F-1s have to file before their original I-20 end date, before they asked us for any extension of that original end date, in order to retain certain automatic extension of employment. So if they need to keep working, for example, I think, I'm more thinking of our longer programs, our PhDs. So if you've got a PhD who needs more time to complete and they need to stay in the US continuously and work, they need to apply before their original I-20 end date to immigration, or else they don't get this benefit to keep working while it's processing. If they file after the original I-20 expiration during their grace period, they can still file with the government. It's okay. They could still be legally present, but they'll lose certain automatic of extension of employment benefits. And that's critical. And that's something we'll chat about a little bit more in a moment. And just so that you know, I'm not getting into all the details. So we're going to have webinars and tutorials about how students go through this now more complex process. But basically, what are they having to show? Well, they're having to show either that they had an I-20 that already had a longer end date, like they're a PhD in a 6-year program. Like I already had this, my program's just longer than my period of stay. Or if they're showing they need more time beyond that, they have to show compelling academic reasons, a documented illness or medical condition, or circumstances beyond their control. And what are those? they're pretty extreme. It's things like natural disasters, school closures. Something critical is delays caused by academic probation or repeated unwillingness to complete program requirements will not be approved. So this is something big. Students are struggling academically. It is not clear to us whether this is an option for them to extend. This needs more unpacking. But this is something to be aware of, and it's some of the points that I will make to you towards the end about what you can do. But I also want you to be aware of these things because you can see these things require asking immigration for this extension. So compelling academic reasons, these are no longer things like, well, the faculty wants them to write a few more journal articles. These are things like they can't complete their degree and they need more time, and you're going to have to prove it to immigration. So this is a more complex process than right now just requesting an extension of the I-20. Changing by travel. So the other option, and we think this is likely going to be more the common option for a lot of students, that this will happen naturally for them as they travel over time. They can also extend their stay by departing the US and re-entering the country with a new I-20 or DS 2019 or an I-20 or DS 2019 that has a longer end date. So here's an example. Let's say right now you've got a PhD, and that PhD, they have an I-20 end date. Their program ends in spring 2031. That's more than 4 years in the future. They finish May 16th, 2031. But when this whole transition thing happens, they end up with the admit until date of October 15th, 2030, because that's the maximum 4 years plus 30 days. So this student, their period of stay is shorter than their I-20 end date because their program is just naturally longer. It's a 6-year program, and they had an end date that was later. This student decides to travel for summer break in 2027, and they return on August 1st, 2027. Here's what we expect. We expect that student who comes back from summer break, when they cross the border, we expect them to now get a new admit until date to June 15th, 2031, because they are now within 4 years of that new reentry date, and they're within 4 years of their I-20 expiration. So they would actually get their true I-20 expiration plus 30 days. So they get the full end of their degree program. And so this may happen if you have a student in a 5 or 6 year program, a 4 year program, and they travel over time. When they re-enter the US, they're going to adjust that end date if it's going to be later. It might not be adjusted if they have an end date that's always within range. So some of this may get worked out where, not every PhD is going to have to file with immigration to extend their program. It may just happen naturally as they travel over time. Other example is an undergrad. They have a May 14th, 2027 I-20 end date, and they were given an admit until date until June 16th, so plus 30 days. But then the student realizes, oh, you know what? I need another semester. I realize I'm missing 2 classes. I need to complete in fall 27, in December 27. So they ask us for an extension. They do it nice and early in December 2026. And then that student travels over the winter break with that new I-20 that has a new end date of December 27th, and they re-enter in January. We would expect that they now get a new admit until date that is extended to January 16th, 2028. So that's that new program end date, December 17th, plus 30 days. So this is how this travel thing would work. So next is academic restrictions. The rule provides new restrictions to F1s related to transfer and change of educational objective. They don't tend to do those things as much, but F1s are the majority student visa. So what are educational objectives? educational level and major and educational level. So if they are below the graduate level, undergrads are restricted to no transfer or change of objectives during the first academic year of the academic program of the school that issued the I-20. So if they are here, they have to be here for one academic year before they would be able to transfer or change their level, or to change their major. Graduates, during the program of study, so during that degree, during the dates of that I-20 or DS 2019, they are not permitted transfer or change of educational objectives. So no transfer, no change of major, no change of educational level during the program. But it does suggest that they could do that after the program. So a student completes a degree. However, all students, all F-1 students, if they complete a program after September 15th at one educational level, so it's not talking about programs completed before that. So if a student completed a bachelor's degree last year, and was starting here in the fall with a new bachelor's degree, which seems unlikely, but let's pretend, they could do that. Or, they decided to go to a community college. Well, they could, right now. But moving forward, if they complete a program, a degree, after September 5th, 2026, at one level, so if a student completes a master's level in 2027, they can't change to a lower level, or the same level at any point in the future. So that's critical to understand. And so there is a bit of transition in this provision. So moving on to continuity of employment. And I know this piece is really important for those of you that work in departments, particularly that work with students that are funded, that have GSR, GSI appointments. For F1s, so keep in your mind, F1s are a bit different. They have what's called a 240-day interim work authorization while an extension of stay is pending. So if a student files with immigration on time before the I-20 expires, so remember that point I was making, that they had an I-20 from Berkeley, that I-20 had an end date. If they filed with immigration for their extension before that document expired, they can keep working on campus, or they could be authorized for CPT for up to 240 days while that extension request is pending with immigration. However, if that student does not do that, if they file during their grace period, which is possible for them, they could be legally allowed to do that, but it's after the original expiration, they do not receive that automatic extension. They would not be able to work. So filing within the grace period preserves their ability to stay in the US, but it does not preserve their work authorization. This does not apply to OPT or STEM OPT, post-completion employment, because that actually has different rules. But this is going to be super important. This is information we're going to track, and we'll have warnings to students so they're aware that they need to meet these certain deadlines if they need to preserve this ability to work. So J1s are a bit different. They have, for some reason, different flexibility built in. It's probably because the J1 has a lot of different categories, not just students. So they're a little bit different for them. As long as they timely file before their AUD, which includes the grace period, so just before their authorized period of stay ends, as long as they file with immigration before that, they can keep working, including their on-campus employment and their academic training, which does include post-completion academic training. So for the J's, there's a little bit more flexibility, and there's a transition provision for J's that if their extension of stay is filed before March 18th, they can keep working to the very end of their DS 2019 while that extension of stay is processing, meaning there isn't a 240-day limit for certain J1s who file for an extension before March 18th. So they're giving them this nice transition where they can just keep working till the end as long as they file before that date for an extension. So F1s, they have post-completion employment benefits that they can apply to the government with. And I think there may be a number of you who've worked with students related to their OPT. That requires that they request documents from us. We need approvals from departments that indicate they're graduating, and they have to file with the government for employment authorizations for post-completion employment called OPT or STEM OPT. Um, so these new OPT requests after the effective date of the rule, a basic OPT request would require filing both an I-765 employment request with the government, with USCIS, and also filing a separate extension of stay request with the government, or travel and reentry. So essentially, they have to file, they're doing two things. Number one, they're asking for employment permission. And number two, they have to also get an extension of stay. So this is going to make that process more complex because they have to do these things all before the end of their admit until date, and any required OPT and STEM filing deadlines. So OPT and STEM OPT also have their own timelines for requesting the employment permission. But this is going to be layered on top of the fact that they also have to extend their stay in order to be able to be approved for the post-completion employment. Students that have a 60-day grace period, so if they're an F1 who has a 30-day grace period, this impacts OPT filing periods and start dates. And that's going to give them less time to find a job, because those who have 60-day grace period right now, they can start their OPT a little later. They have a little more time after graduation to start. So this is giving less job search time. There's no employment until two things happen. They get approved by immigration for the employment, and the extension of stay is approved. They are allowed to travel. So if they've timely filed things, then they're permitted to travel while requests are pending. If they do leave and they come back, their new admit until date, their ability to stay in the US, is going to be based on either the recommended or approved OPT end dates. So this is really key. So just like that 240-day rule, where students are extending, we want them to apply at a certain time to get max benefits. This transition provision is really, really critical for your students that are graduating in summer, graduating in fall, or graduating in spring, finishing their degrees, because this rule has some limited transitions which provide some really nice benefits. If they're in the US on September 15th, 2026, and they entered before that, so they had to be here before that, and their body is in the US on September 15th, they'll be automatically transitioned to a new period of stay, and the F1s get to keep that grace period of 60 days. As of the transition, this would be the max end date. So on September 15th, those students who are in the US, this is what their max end date would look like. So, they wake up on September 15th and boom, they're an F1, they get a date to the end of their I-20 plus 60 days. Or if their I-20 is longer, meaning their degree program actually goes longer, they would get a maximum of 4 years plus 60 days. So the max end date for those students would be November 14th, 2030. Or the end of the program, whichever is shorter. So they're not going to get 4 years if they're in a 1-year program, okay? But this is the max end date. So J1s, their max end date would be October 15th, 2030. So again, it's the same for them. They get either the end of their DS 2019, which is the end of their degree program, plus 30, or they get 4 years plus 30, whichever is shorter. And then Fs have a very special provision for transitions if they're applying on or before March 18th, 20, oh, that should say March 18th, 2027. I need to edit that. If they're applying for OPT before March 18th, 2027. So if you have an F1 and they do not exit and re-enter the US on or after September 15th, so they stay put, they may qualify for this special provision. If they're an F1 and they file their application with immigration for their OPT, or they're already on OPT and they ask for their extension of OPT, their STEM extension, if they file that on or before March 18th, they do not have to take the separate extension of stay application. Basically, they get to do what they do now. They get to do what we would say right now is the normal process, where they just file with the government and say, can you give me my employment? If they get approved for employment, it automatically extends them, and their extension of stay, they retain that 60-day grace period. So they get automatically extended to the end of their approved OPT plus 60 days. And if they're applying for OPT for the first time after graduation, their timeline is based on the 60-day grace period. So they get a little more time to look for jobs. They get they could choose a later OPT start date. However, if that F1 exits the US and they enter again before applying for OPT, so let's say you've got someone who's graduating in the spring and they travel over winter break, they're going to lose that eligibility for the transition. When they come back, they lose the transition provision. They're admitted with a fixed end date, they get the 30-day grace period, and they have to follow that new procedure of applying for work permission and extension of stay. However, if they stick around and they apply and they travel later, well, that has a less terrible result, which is the student can come back. They don't have to file for an extension of stay, but when they come back, they're only going to get the 30-day grace period. Okay, so they lose that extra time at the end of their employment. Okay, so I know this is a lot of information. So what can we do? Well, right now, here's what we've been telling students. We want them to come back before September 15th. New students are supposed to be here by the start of instruction. So, hopefully that's not a big deal. Continuing students should be here for the start of instruction. But we've told everybody the simplest answer is to say, get back here by September 15th, because if there's a transition provision that's helpful for them, then they might be able to qualify for it. Some students, it's not that big of a deal if they don't come back by the 15th. If they're graduating like 3 years in the future, maybe it's not such a big deal. But, what we want to tell them just as a blanket is you should be here on September 15th. If they're planning to transfer soon, they need to get us that transfer request as soon as possible. If their EGT in Cal Central is currently later than their current I-20 or DS 2019 end date, and I'm going to say to you, if that EGT is real, meaning they actually need all that time to finish their degree, they should request an extension now so that we can get them extended, and they'll transition to that, the longest end date that we can give them to complete their degree. So if they haven't yet extended to their EGT and when they're actually supposed to graduate, they should be doing that now. If students are an F1 who's coming in range for OPT or STEM OPT, we want them to apply during the transition if possible. And for those students, we're telling them, don't leave and re-enter before your OPT request if you want those transition benefits. So for 12-month OPT, what that looks like is if a student is completing in summer 26 fall 26 or spring 27, they can start applying for OPT up to 90 days before that completion date. So summer, they can already apply right now. Fall, they could start applying in mid-September. Spring, they could start applying in um, mid-February. So essentially, our advice is don't travel before you can apply if you want that transition. Otherwise, you're going to have a far more complex OPT process. Students who are already on OPT, they're out there working. If they want the STEM OPT extension, they would have to file on or before June 16th, 2027. So that's somebody whose work permission is ending before that. They can file up to 90 days before their expiration of employment. So they'd have to be expiring employment June 16th or earlier. If it's later, they're going to have to do the new process. So what should faculty and staff be aware of right now? I think one thing I really want to make you all aware of is to be mindful of student urgency versus their perception of urgency. So a lot of students may be really highly anxious and they perceive that everything's urgent right now. It has to happen right now. Well, the rule's not becoming effective until September. Okay. There are not a lot of things right now that are highly urgent. Getting someone transferred out because they're starting in fall, yeah, that's something we want to work on. A student who's expiring sooner, yeah, we would definitely want to work on that. Um, but a student who's kind of freaking out because, they're really, really anxious because they're in a graduate program that expires in, you know, that finishes in 2029, and that's on their I-20, and they're upset that they won't get a stay of 4 years. That's not urgent. If the student doesn't need 4 years to complete their degree, then they don't need to be pressuring you to extend their document. So I do want to be clear about that. You know, so if you're not sure if a student's asking you for something that's appropriate, feel free to check in with our office. Um, Things like extension of the I-20, extension of program, OPT, J-1 academic training, that requires department approval because you have to tell us what do they need to finish. Are they completing their degree and eligible for post-completion training? Last minute requests are going to be really tough and they may place students in difficult situations. Um, and a reminder that program extensions, those are for students who can't complete their degree by the document end date. So if their I-20 is expiring in fall 2026 and the student can't complete, they are unable, they actually need classes beyond that. That is a legitimate reason. A student who just doesn't feel like it or wants to stretch out their time, that's not a legitimate reason for extension. So keep that in mind. You're going to have to explain why they can't complete by the end date. We want to know what they have to do, what's stopping them from completing the degree. So I've heard from some departments that some departments have gotten requests for some kind of extraordinary, what I would say extraordinary request. Like you've got a PhD who's supposed to be finishing in 2028, and they're demanding that you extend them, their EGT, that you fill out an extension to extend them to 2030 because, well, it needs to be a legitimate reason. Did something happen with their research that you can document that they are actually not able to complete by 2028? And you know for a fact that it's going to take 2 more years, you need to explain that. Okay. But if it's not correct, if what the student's coming up with is, I'm anxious about this end date, send them to our office. Let us talk through with them what's really going on. But what we need from you is correct academic information. So maintaining current academic or institutional policies. Sometimes folks want to do students favors and it's not doing them a favor if we're not maintaining our institutional policies. The other thing is to keep students on track for degree. That we are no longer in an era where we want students dragging their feet. or we want departments kind of dragging things along with the student because they want more instruction out of them, or they want them doing really post-completion research now. This is a time where we really want them completing on time as best they can, because extensions are really for students who can't complete on time for real academic reasons. Monitor your students who are struggling and pursue active outreach. So your international students who are struggling, they're going to face greater difficulty than your domestic students who are struggling, just by the fact that the procedures for them to keep going could be harder if they don't finish on time. Help your students maintain status. That means if that class says it's in person, it is in person. Um, if they're doing research, research is coded as in person. They're expected to be here, or they're on an absentia. They are working with authorization. If they should not be working off campus without permission from us. They shouldn't go over the allowable maximums for on-campus work. They're enrolled full time. If they need to reduce their course load, they're asking us first, and we help them, and we give them the authorization. And if they're withdrawing, they're talking to our office first about withdrawing so that we can give them permission and take the right steps. Because right now, making mistakes, if they violate their status under this new rule, it's really, really serious. So it's just not a time where we want to be operating in a gray area and making exceptions for students. Have them come to us so we can discuss what's the issue, and then determine, well, what are your options? And then all these issues I'm telling you about, don't advise on them. Refer them to us. As they receive advising from us, we can assist them in considering their academic options. What we need from you is all of your expertise in their academic options. What are the options? What do they need to finish their degree? What do they need to do what they need to do academically? And what are all those academic policies? What we have to figure out is what is possible given these new regulations. We don't want to leave that to you, and we can't. It's actually information that, as professionals who do this full time, for me, I've done this more than 20 years. This is complex for me. So I just want to make sure that we're kind of all sticking to what we're good at, because we really want to support your students, but we don't want them getting incomplete or inaccurate information. Be aware that processing times could complicate on-campus employment or internship timelines for students that need to extend. So just have that in your awareness. I don't think it's something we have to panic about right now, but just know these are going to be critical issues for students who need more time to degree. Transferring in and out, this is a complex issue. We're not getting into all of it right now because of the restrictions, but just know this is complex. Some academic options may not be available to students in the future. For example, those things that are restricted. If you have a graduate student who's graduating with an MBA in spring 2027, and they want to come back and do a master's of engineering in fall 2027, I don't know if that's an option for them. So we may have to talk through students some realities. There's still some stuff we're unpacking, because there's still some things that are unclear about these academic restrictions and mobility issues. But I just want to be mindful that it may be that students just simply don't have the options that they used to. If you're interested in advocacy, I put a webpage there. Our professional organization, NAFSA, has information about advocacy. There's potential for going to Congress for certain considerations, for making your voice known. If you're feeling that's something that you're interested in, you can take a look at that info there. So I know that we've gotten through a lot of information. What I want to do is try to unpack some of this as we talk through pre-submitted Q&A. Currently, I don't think we have time for live Q&A because I do want to get through the pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to move my way through as best I can these pre-submitted questions. Okay, first up is general and period of stay questions. So big question I got. Can students be admitted by UC admissions to programs longer than 4 years? Is it okay for students to be enrolled in a 5 to 6 year program, for example, a PhD? Yes, 100%. So once again, when you hear the term admission for immigration purposes, what that means is entering in the US and being given a period of stay. And that's the period of stay for that single entry. So I cross the border, the government says, I have a period of stay that's 4 years plus 30 days. But I'm enrolled in a 6 year program. Well, that means I have to extend my stay somehow. It doesn't mean I can't be given an I-20 for 6 years. It doesn't mean I can't be in a degree program that's longer. The government is highly aware through, thousands of comments that programs are longer than that. What this is intended is that there's essentially a check-in for students in long-term programs. That if a student's here for 4 years, they want someone in the government making a decision about whether they get to continue. And that's either by requesting extension from the government or by the student leaving and crossing the border again, where a decision is again made. So a lot of questions came from, I have a student from this country. Does this affect them differently? Oh, no, there's no carve outs for anybody that's special. Everybody's the same. Same rule applies to everybody. But what could be different is the options students have and the choices that they make. For example, we have students, primarily from the African continent, from countries that are subject to a travel ban. Um, well, extending by travel, that might not be an option for them because if they leave the country, they can't come back. But, or students who have really short visas in their passport, and if they leave the country and they want to come back, they have to apply for a new visa. And as we all know, it takes a long time to get a new visa to get entry to the US. So if a student needs a new visa stamp in their passport, choosing to extend stay by travel could be a different consideration for them. But students from Canada, they are a special country in one way in relation to the US, that their students, they don't actually have to get a visa stamp in their passport to enter the US. They have all the same other things. They have an I-20, they have to be enrolled the right ways. It's all the same. But they just don't make them march into a consulate and get a stamp in their passport to cross the border. So Canadian maybe has a little more fluidity of travel because they're not going to have a visa that might expire. So what's the impact? So a lot of questions about how does this impact this group? How does this impact this group? So let's think about maybe kind of looking at them in a couple different groups. So what's the impact for current students? Well, for current students, it's going to depend on, well, how far are they in their degree? How much they have left? Um, are they, do they have a long time left, like, more than 4 years? Do they have 1 year left? Do they have 2 years left? Are they graduating soon? So the impact for these different students may depend on how long they're going to be here and what their plans are. Students with 4 year degrees, like our undergrads, well, they've got a while. And, likely depending on when they're applying, they'll be able to extend if they need more time. But I think for undergrads, like the things we have concerns about are well, they tend to be pretty slow with getting to us about their extensions, or they do things at last minute. So we do have concerns, particularly about that group acting in a timely manner, or about making major changes within the first year. We're still looking into that and what it means to change from undeclared to declared. Is it really a different major? So some of this we need more guidance from the government to see how highly impactful it will be. But most likely bio is going to be involved in these processes if we have to curtail or hold back processes. For example, say somebody can't change a major until longer, or, for a grad student, if they can't change a major. A PhD with a 5 or 6 year degree, well, that's somebody that if they've got a program end date that as of September 15th is more than 4 years in the future, well, we know that student's going to need to extend between now and when that end date is. Do we have to worry about it right this second? No, because it's in the future. It may work itself out over travel, but it is something pending in the future that maybe that student can already start thinking about, well, what's my plan? I know I actually need more time. So what am I going to do? Am I traveling? Or I may need to prepare in the future for an extension. Transfer in and out, those are going to be tricky. So do you have students who are looking at transferring for spring and we're concerned about it? Have them check with bio. If they're transferring out and they're not going to a higher level, that's of concern to us. Have them check with bio. We got questions about how will this affect students who have a reduced course load through DSP? It doesn't make a difference because DSP's reduced course load is not a visa authorized reduced course load. So that's never been a thing for us. So that's something we always want people to understand is for visa purposes, it does not matter if a student has an accommodation for reduced course load. They have to get authorization for reduced course load through bio separately in their immigration record. Is that possible? Yeah, we have different options to do that, but they have to go through the procedure with bio. Nothing's changed with that. What is changed is that if they don't do that, they could be in violation of status, and that violation has bigger consequences now. Financial aid. I think people are thinking about other regulatory changes, but international students are not impacted by the changes to federal financial aid because they don't receive federal financial aid. They're not eligible. What will the costs be? So this is a great question. Extension of stay, it's going to depend because there will be fees involved. They either have to pay a fee to file with the government for a government form, or they might have to travel, and travel has its own costs. So the form that's likely to be used for filing the extension of stay is called the I-539. So a few of you have been doing your homework. Amazing. And you asked who's responsible for paying the I-539 fee for extension of stay with USCIS. Well, the student, it's their application. They're applying. So right now, we're not ready to get too far down the road. We're going to have tutorials for students on how to do that process. But the paying of it, it's a government fee. I think there's questions, you can certainly think about questions of would departments want to support that? But the truth is, don't lock your mind into that's how they have to do it. Students do have multiple options. So I do want you to think about, we're too early in the process to be really thinking about that. But does the university have an obligation to pay that fee for them? I don't know if that's a question we can really address right now. Does my department play a role in any decisions made about the DS rule policy? Ugh, not really. I mean, we submitted comments to the government from the UC, and we provided them information about their programs, but there isn't anything you can do right now to change the regulation. It's set, it's coming into play on September 15th. But what we do need from your department is, input, if as we develop processes, we may need your input. And what we do need is partnership and working with your students to get these processes taken care of. But your decisions aren't any different. You have the same decisions you always did. Who's getting what funding, what's their actual program end date, what's required for them to finish their degree. Is it appropriate for you to grant an extension to somebody? Do they actually have time to degree that they need and components they have to complete? That's still all the same. Effective date and travel. So a lot of questions boil down to, well, if students enter before September 15th, does this rule impact them? Yes, it definitely does. It impacts everybody. It's not different for anybody. That the rule still applies. It's just there are certain transition provisions like the OPT, having easier OPT if they apply before March 18th. Or if they hang around and don't leave, then they might get that extra 60-day grace period if they're an F1. That's the only benefit. Those are really the only transitional benefits that are helpful. So for a lot of students, if they're not applying for OPT before spring 27, or they're not on STEM, they're not going to apply for STEM extension before before June 2027, the transition really only gets them a 60-day grace period. It doesn't get them more than that. They don't get anything else special. Same academic restrictions, all of that. So does this impact students who stay in the US and don't travel? So it's kind of the same thing. So the transition provisions, it really depends on the student situation. But the rule, I just want to make sure this rule impacts everybody, whether or not they entered the US as we advise them before the 15th. So a lot of questions, can students travel? Nobody's saying they can't travel, and we never have. But I think the question is, will traveling impact them in specific ways? So if they leave, when are they coming back? When are they graduating? Could leaving and returning at that time impact the ease of their applying for OPT? Or is it impacting their grace period? If, and other travel issues just haven't changed, where travel still remains risky because of vetting, because of delays in processing, just because of the unpredictability of global events. And the border may be a bit chaotic around September 15th as Customs and Border Protection tries to figure out what's happening with these new admission dates, because they're involved too. Can my students study abroad? Can they do an absentia? They can still do all the same things, but the dates of their travel, especially in this transition period, could be impactful for them. So are you doing an absentia or study abroad and you're graduating pretty soon? Well, that could be impactful. We want to talk to those students. So as always, we always want to talk to students who are doing an absentia or considering studying abroad. We want to talk to them. Extension of stay. We got lots of questions about this. Some of them were very in the weeds, like people really wanting to know the nitty gritty. We're not really here to talk that level of fine grained. But here's some of the ones that I felt like were really hitting some key points. What if a student has already been in the US for 4 years when the rule becomes effective? Will they have to apply for the extension of stay immediately? No, 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 no. So they're being transitioned from that date. Their period of stay will start from that date, September 15th, and their period of stay will be until the end of their I-20 or DS 2019, which should be the end of their degree program, or it will be the end of their practical training plus their grace period. That's what they'll get. Or if it's longer, so if you had a student who is in year 1 of their PhD, they would get 4 years plus the grace period. So it doesn't matter, if you had a student who had 4 years before and they've got 3 more years in the future, that's okay. They get what they have at the time, essentially. Can students extend their EGT this summer? Yeah, sure, they can do that. But if they're extending their EGT this summer, we have to extend them to summer, and that extension is going to have certain requirements. And some of our extension requirements, we've made some adjustments to allow things to be a little more flexible, including for the summer. So we used to ask for proof of summer enrollment. Now we're allowing students to extend in summer without pre-confirming enrollment, but instead of that, they're going to have to show evidence that they can pay for summer, because summer's in the future and we can't confirm that they've already paid for it when they enrolled. What will change in BIO's process for extensions? That's a good question, and we're still building that out. We're going to capture more information for sure. We'll likely need additional information from departments. Right now, nothing big has changed, but in the future, if students are applying for extension of stay with the government, they're going to need probably more robust documentation. It doesn't mean that we have to, but in order for the student to be able to do that more cumbersome process, they're likely going to need more documentation. What will be required from departments for the extension of stay? We're still looking into what this is going to look like because currently that guidance doesn't exist from the government, what that documentation would look like. I mean, what we know is they would need evidence of financial support. They would need evidence of their compelling academic reasons, their medical documentation, those things we listed before. But what does the form of that take? That's what we'll have to build out and have guidance for students as well as departments if it's for a compelling academic reason. Will extension of stay be easy? That's another tricky question. So remember, there's two ways they can extend stay by applying to the government with that application or via travel, where they leave and come back using their normal travel documents and their I-20 has a later end date, they're admitted to the later end date. Um, it's hard to say. We don't know what either process is really going to look like in reality yet. We know what travel looks like currently, but we don't know if it will look different now that this rule is approved and what will be reviewed at the border more deeply. The extension of stay with the government, will it be easy? I would say easy is not how I would describe it. It is probably more complex than when students apply for OPT, which that alone, we have a robust tutorial. We will be working on tutorials to assist them with this process as well. So it will not be simple, but it will be doable. And we're dealing with Berkeley students. You know, they can do it. And they submit complicated government applications every day when they apply for OPT. So I think they can do this as well. How long will these stays take to be approved by USCIS, by the government? That's a great question, too. That remains to be seen. Currently, they haven't opened up premium processing for the form they intend to use for the ones who apply in the US. Um, so yeah, I can't really give you an idea of that because I don't know what this particular process will look like because that form's used for a lot of different things and the processing times range from a couple months to a really long time. Um, what support will Bio provide to students filing that I-539, which is used for the extension of stay with immigration? So we are planning to have a tutorial. There are certain things we can't really high level advise on because that would be crossing into practicing law without a license. Which we can't do, but we can certainly give them guidelines and give them kind of, you know, some good pointers and walk them through some basics. So we're going to continue to do that. For those of you who are familiar with our OPT tutorial and instructions, it'll be similar, probably not as highly detailed because there are things in it that are a little riskier. But you know, we're going to provide them the level of support that they currently receive from Bio. So they'll be taken care of. And we'll be providing information about extending via travel. So we're going to prepare them for both. If a student applies for an extension of stay to extend their academic program, so let's say, let me give you an example, undergrad needs one more semester, they extend from spring 27 to fall 2027. So they have to file an extension of stay for the academic program. They do it, great. Will they have to apply again for OPT? Yes, they will, because they're only going to get an admit until date until that new academic program extension. So yay, they extended to December 2027, but they want to apply for OPT. They need more time. They have to do it all over again. So think about this too. If students need extensions, they've just got to do it. But a student kind of dilly-dallying, dragging their feet, changing majors a lot, well, maybe they can do it, but they're going to end up doing this process over and over. And it's going to be cumbersome. So yeah, they would have to do it multiple times. Should my student extend or delay graduation? No, they should not. They should finish on time. That's what I could say. So, you know, keep on track. Delaying is not going to help them. Delaying will be complicated and it has to be for legit academic reasons, not just because they're worried about the job market. That's not an academic reason, unfortunately. They can't get an extension for that. And let me just be clear, extending graduation, their degree grant date, that doesn't matter. It's about when they complete program requirements. That's what immigration cares about. So, you know, no artificial dates for them. It really needs to be about when they're finishing. So, common question, students asking for extension years in the future, 2029 to 2020, 2030. Um, I can't promise them funding. I don't even know academically if they need more time. Should I be approved? This is exactly what we're asking from you. So, first, all that we're asking for that extension form is we want you to tell us um, why can't they finish and do they actually need more time to complete their degree? And what is it that they need to complete? So if right now you don't even know and it looks like they are going to be able to complete, it might be that you tell that student, I don't see that you need an extension, or this isn't something that we can do right now. The funding, right now, all that we're requiring if we extend a student is one academic year of funding, or if they're only extending within the next academic year, we'd want to see the funding say for, spring 2027, because that's within the next academic year. If it's in the future, if it's 2 years from now, we're only going to review the first academic year of funding because that's what's required. Um, so a conversation from you could be, well, you might have the funding now for this extension, but I'm telling you right now, I don't know if you'll have the funding at that time. So you may, that's something that the student may need to be concerned about and really think about. It could be that the funding comes through for them between now and then, but you recommending that they extend their program is different than them having the funding that they need if it's way, way in the future. So I think that that is something to think about if you're recommending extensions for students that are years in the future, that that's a time you can't actually predict, and you need to determine what you can actually predict. Academic issues. We had a lot of these. I'm still moving along. So does the timing reset for each degree? So if it takes 2 years for a master's, can it take four more for the PhD? Yeah, it can, but they have to apply for an extension for that period. So if a student completed a master's and then did a change of educational level for a PhD, which is a higher level, um, then when they applied for an extension of stay, so that 2 year master's would only have an authorized stay until the end of that 2 years. They have to extend to change the educational level higher, and they could ask for whatever the amount was, but the student has to be completing the master's and taking four. Um, Will this impact transfer students for fall 26, spring 27, fall 27? Fall 26 transfers, I think aren't going to be highly impacted because they should have all transferred in before the transition. Spring 27, yeah, this group could be impacted. They need to check in with us. Anything beyond the effective date, that is going to be impacted by the new restrictions. Can students change their major or their degree level? I think the answer is if they're an undergrad, they'd have to be here for one academic year. Um, if they're a graduate student during their current degree, no, they cannot. Um, and that's how the regulations are written. There's more to unpack in that about, what constitutes a program, things like that. But the short answer right now is those restrictions. Once we hit September 15th, there's new restrictions. So, can a student attend a four-year school and get a bachelor's and then be extended to attend a new PhD program for another 4 years? Yeah, that could be possible. The logistics of it, the timing, that's what's of concern. Would they need more extensions if the PhD were longer? Yeah, they probably would. So, students who have long-term plans are going to end up having multiple extensions of stay, or they travel and achieve that. Under the rule, would receiving an MS en route within a PhD program count as a change in educational objective? Um, According to the kind of explanatory information in the rule itself, they specifically call out this case and they indicate it would not. So if they're admitted to a PhD and as part of that PhD, they happen to be awarded an MS along the way, that's not changing. They're not changing their level down to the MS. It's just happening along the way. But What would be different is the next question. What about a PhD who's admitted to a PhD and along the way they want to add another master's, like they've got a PhD in physics, and I don't know, along the way they want to add an MBA. No, they're in the physics PhD program. That would be another major, essentially, in another degree. They wouldn't, if they were admitted at the beginning to both programs at the time of admission, they're on the I-20. When they enter the US, they'd be like a double major. And as long as they didn't shift, they could do that. But that's more challenging. They're kind of locked in. What about dual degrees, joint degree programs? So dual degrees, again, if they're admitted to both programs, that's their program of study, but it has to be that they're admitted, that's the way the program works. Joint degrees, um, these are going to take a little more working with our partner institutions like UCSF, because I know those students change home campuses, and this is going to be a challenge for us because we will not be able to transfer those students campus to campus. So those are things that we're currently looking into, and we'll be partnering with UCSF about, how to manage working with those students, because they're just going to kind of have some restrictions on the mobility that we used to have with them. Who's responsible to ensure students don't change programs and majors? Berkeley International Offices. This is our thing, and we're going to be developing systems to track these issues. We'll be working with our campus partners if we need to be added as approvers on e-forms. Right now, we're still trying to determine what exactly we need to do and what the appropriate process is for us to step in, whether we want to track via data or whether we want to actually stop things from happening. But, it's not your role to know all these rules. We want you to know them because when we tell a student, hey, I saw you're trying to change your major and you can't because you haven't been here for a year, that you understand why they're hearing that. OPT and STEM. Can students still apply for OPT and STEM? Yes, they can. So that didn't change. The mechanism by which they apply is changing. How long will this combination of OPT and extension of stay take to be approved? So if they both apply to immigration for both of those sets of processes, I don't know. We'll have to see how long they take. If they're going by travel, I don't know either. It's just new, and we're going to have to get data on how long these processes end up taking. How does this affect the number of days a student needs to find an OPT post-completion job after graduation? So if they're not transition students, if they don't get that extra 60 days, essentially their OPT is going to start within 30 days of their degree completion. That'd be the latest possible start date. And if that OPT begins, once they're approved for the OPT, if it begins, it's going to start counting days of unemployment against them. As it always does. So students right now who choose the latest start date, they could choose a latest start date of 60 days from graduation. If they do that, the time before, like between graduation and their start date, they're not required to work. In fact, they can't work. So they get a little more runway looking for jobs. With the 30-day grace period, they're going to get less runway if they wanted a later date. A student who wants an earlier date, it wouldn't make a difference. Does this impact PhDs who've advanced to candidacy but are applying to start their OPT employment before they graduate? No, I mean, there's no changes in that allowance. So the only thing that changed about OPT was like how they apply. It didn't change the rules related to OPT. It changed how they apply in the grace period, which is about timelines. But if you have a PhD who's advanced to candidacy, technically they're eligible for post-completion employment. As long as they're making progress towards their degree, they can actually start their OPT prior to completing the degree. So that's why some of you may see our students doing filing fee and they're actually on OPT with us, because we can't give them that as an extra semester, but they're allowed to start their OPT before they finish the degree because they've completed coursework and have only thesis or dissertation remaining. There's a special regulation that allows that. Does this impact CPT? No direct impacts to CPT. The main issue is that if they need to extend and they need CPT, there's those provisions about, well, if they extend while they're in the US, they only get a certain period of time to continue on campus or CPT employment that they've been given permission for. Or if they don't apply within the right window, they might not be able to do it. So it's indirectly impacted. There isn't any change to, CPT rules. And then for those of you who've worked with J-1 students, is applying for J-1 academic training the same as applying for OPT? No, it's different. And thankfully, it just goes through us. It doesn't have to go through immigration for the employment piece. But just like F1s with this new rule, they would have to go through extension of stay if it's post completion and they need more time. They're going to need extra time to finish that post completion training period. So while they don't have to apply to the government for the employment permission, they do have to apply to the government for extension of stay, but they get this added benefit of they do get to continue working or do their academic training while they're waiting for the extension because the J provisions are a bit different. So some things are a little simpler for post-completion training for the Js. Okay, that's it. Thank you for staying a bit later. Resources, we have a website, this BioDS rule webpage. This is where we're going to be putting our resources, including a copy of this webinar, videos, FAQs. Our professional organization, NAFSA, has an analysis. It's a real deep dive. It's more for professionals who study this, but you're welcome to look. They also have a duration of status explainer that kind of breaks down that concept. The International Student Resource Center has a lot of good resources that are very accessible. They have a review of the rule and an FAQ that's written for students. And it's actually quite accessible, and I would definitely recommend that. Study in the States is the government's websites. They have a quick facts page and an FAQ. These are only for F1s. A different part of the government handles J1s, and they've not come out with an FAQ. If you have questions, you're welcome to email internationaloffice@berkeley.edu. If you're a faculty staff, it's probably just going to come to me, and I will do my best to address your questions. Just keep in mind, we may not have all the answers right now, but we're definitely doing our best. Your students should definitely email International Office if they have questions, and we have advising services for them Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Starting next week, we're starting our normal advising services for the fall. That means in the morning, it's all virtual. In the afternoon, it's in person, and it's all drop-in. So if you're hearing students who are saying, I can't get an appointment for next week, it's because there's no appointments for next week because they can just drop in. They've gotten a message about it too. So thanks for coming. I'm going to close out, and I will see many of you soon at the GSAO meeting. So take care, everyone, and have an excellent weekend.